Suikoden III released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in 2002. Now, while the general consensus would be that it's not as refined as its predecessor, Suikoden III has managed to remain one of my favorite RPGs ever since its release. It's easily one of the better RPGs on PS2. Personally, I think Suikoden III ranks among the best in the series, perhaps even matching the quality of Suikoden II. But anyways, I'm not here to convince you of that. This will not be a review of Suikoden III or a comparison to any other game in the series. Instead, I'm going to do something a little different. This will be my top 5 reasons why I believe Suikoden III is every bit as good as any other game in the series. I will just go ahead and say this before I get started. My video will contain some spoilers, so if you haven't played the game yet and you want to, as much as it pains me to say this, you better stop watching. Otherwise, you've been warned. First, I just want to cover my history real quick with the series. How did I start playing Suikoden? As a kid, while I was busy playing Final Fantasy VII, a friend of mine was busy with a funny looking game called Suikoden that he had rented from a nearby video rental store. I was pretty slow to warm up to the game. I eventually gave it a shot at some point. I really don't remember a whole lot about the original Suikoden. What I do recall is that it looked like a low-budget game, and that now, in 2019, the time of this video, gives off the appearance of something that somebody had made in a very old version of RPG Maker. Nevertheless, I liked it enough to finish it. This all happened in about 1997, give or take a year. And I would not experience Suikoden again until its third installment in the series in 2002, so about 5 or 6 years later, give or take. I never recall seeing Suikoden 2 for sale anywhere, or to rent for that matter. In fact, I wouldn't get to play it until approximately 2008/2009, after I had already played every other game in the series. I was sitting at home one day and suddenly realized that I was an adult and I could just buy a copy on eBay. So I did. I paid, just shy of $100. I mean, like 92 or 96 if memory serves. Suikoden 2 had become this sort of elusive mystery to me. It had released while I was still a teenager and very quickly fell into this obscure abyss where it just became something you could only ever read about. Now, this might seem odd to some people, but Suikoden 3 fueled my obsession for that second game in the series by incorporating saved data from the first 2 games. I wanted to experience this extra content for myself, but there was a problem. I was missing that crucial stepping stone of Suikoden 2. So in short, if not for Suikoden 3's extra content, I might never have been curious enough to spend the money on Suikoden 2. Who knows? By today's standards, 2019, at the time of this video, the extra content in Suikoden 3, if you've played the others, is pretty lame. In fact, even back then, it wasn't that much. But this was like Mass Effect before Mass Effect. So when Suikoden 2 finally arrived at my door, I felt like a king. Also, in case you didn't pick up on it, Suikoden 2 was the final game in the series that I got to experience. The order I played them was Suikoden 1, then I played Suikoden 3, and then Suikoden 5, then Suikoden 4, and then finally Suikoden 2. Whether we like it or not, the order in which we experience things can shape our perspective. I'm grateful to have experienced Suikoden 2 last, because I believe that gives me a different appreciation towards not just that game, but all of the other ones in the series. Now, this isn't me trying to say that Suikoden 2 isn't any good, but just me perhaps trying to say that there's room at the top. So, without using up any more time, let's get right into it, why I think Suikoden 3 showcases some of the best of what the series has to offer. Reason number 5, graphics. Suikoden 3 was released during a time where going 3D was make or break. And not only are the 108 Stars of Destiny rich with detail this time around, in fact, they seem to be where most of the detail went. Suikoden 3 gives that impression that perhaps a 3D game or 2 preceded it in the series. The characters look that good. Suikoden 3 was the first in the series to go 3D, and it does so incredibly well. Now, normally I'm not a graphics person, but after playing this game again in 2019, 17 years after it came out, I'm still in awe of how good the characters look. To this day, Chris Lightfellow is still my favorite in her full Zexen armor. I mean, it just looks amazing with its level of detail. Also mention-worthy are the different heights, the different builds of the characters. This game definitely never feels as though the dimensions of each character have to fit within a box. From the tiny Shaban to the huge axe-wielding Halleck, Suikoden III delivers on variety, and does so in a detail-rich way. I can't believe this was on PS2, a system that released only 2 years prior to Suikoden III. Reason number 4, presentation. Okay, I don't mean graphics this time, but rather how Suikoden III makes use of all of its assets. One inspiration for this video is that no other RPG reminds me more of a play than Suikoden III. Now, much the same as a play, it's less about where you are and more about what is happening. A common criticism I hear of Suikoden III is that it has few areas to explore. While some RPGs have you hopping on boats or airships to explore other continents, Suikoden III takes place entirely in one area. If you focus on that, you won't even notice that you're in the Great Hollow again, or Brass Castle again, because something different is occurring each time. One could say that Suikoden III has limited set pieces. The same as a play only has one stage, and has to make the most of it. The game makes great use of its assets, which include an interesting plot, a plethora of unique characters, and reason number 3, the camera. The camera in this game deserves a spot on the tablet of stars. Of course, I'm not talking about the camera during gameplay. That one is hit and miss. Sometimes it's too close, rarely is it too far. The camera's okay on the open plains, but it's up too close on the mountains and in caves. No, I'm talking about the camera during cutscenes. Suikoden III is a game that takes place within boundaries. What is cool about the camera is that it's not afraid to go outside those boundaries. Also, this coincides with my last point because during conversations, the camera doesn't just sit there while characters talk. That'd be kind of boring. No, it moves about, busier than anything else in the game. A lot of work went into its positioning, its speed, its movements, and you can really tell. This game easily has some of the most memorable camera work I've seen in any RPG. One scene in particular that always sticks out in my mind is when Jeto's group is in Caleria. They visit the tavern there, and they have a couple talks, I think, in the game. And not only does your perspective shift about, but there's this one scene where Isla's asking a question, and the group ignores her a couple times, and her anger builds, and the game remembers to come back around to her, and eventually she just blows up. During that same scene also, Ace leaves the room to wake up Jacques, but instead Jacques enters from the opposite direction that Ace goes. It's kind of like this comical enter-exit kind of thing, and this just helps the game feel like a play, like I had mentioned before. Another scene is when Thomas is defending Budahuk from the advancing Zexens. The night before Thomas is to be removed from his role as master, he visits Ike in the library. Not only does the camera look down on the scene from above, which you can never get the camera to do that during gameplay, but the camera positions itself in a bookshelf looking directly out on Ike and Thomas, who is behind Ike. Really creative camera work. Reason number 2, no nonsense dialogue. Suikoden III has a lot to say, and rarely is it ever boring. Characters say what they mean, and they mean what they say. They get right through it. Missing are so many of the things that bog down too many JRPGs. For example, we've all heard this, someone's a pervert, someone's a bad cook, someone's a womanizer, someone snores when they sleep. There's none of that in this game. There's a lot to unpack here in Suikoden III, and while the game can feel kind of slow sometimes to pull back that curtain, the pathway there is just littered with nothing but organic dialogue that's careful not to say too much too quickly. Jeto is one such example. We really don't get a glimpse into much of who he is, but there are a few moments when we get to see more of what's under the hood. For example, one scene that I love is when Franz is being ridiculed for his siding with Harmonia. Jeto just hauls off on one of the villagers. And that's clearly a moment in itself because you really don't get to see much of that in this game. But then what Jeto goes on to say afterward is far more impactful. Other well-chosen words include Chris having to endure remarks about her being a woman. Sarah at one point tells her that it should be easier to live as a woman than a hero. And Lucia tells Chris that as a woman and a leader, she must balance showing strength and weakness simultaneously. Now, while these might incur the ire of some because the men don't experience such things, I feel as though it gives Chris more obstacles to overcome, which she just does. She does so without complaint. She doesn't even seem to acknowledge these things as obstacles, and that's why Chris is my favorite character out of the three main characters. And perhaps the one moment that showcases the dialogue is one that makes use of very little words at all. There's a scene near the end of the game when Hugo is remembering Lulu, and the camera pans and Lulu is just there. He has no spoken dialogue, he just turns, he smiles, and then he vanishes. And that is it's a very powerful moment that does not make the mistake of overstating what it's trying to say. Now, very quickly, before I reveal my number one reason, I just want to go over some honorable mentions, things that were tough to omit, but these have probably been covered in plenty of other videos out there on the internet. The skill system. The skill system in this game is a lot of fun. It's really satisfying to use and level up new characters, just to see if they acquire any skills that you've not yet seen and how they might benefit your party. The combat is fun. The battles in this game are very enjoyable, particularly when you get to see those leveled up skills in action. The runes are a ton of fun, and some of the spells look absolutely awesome. Things can get pretty tense sometimes. That's if you're not using a guide to play this game, if you're just going it on your own. Things can actually come down to the wire, and it is a thrill to win by the skin of your teeth. Some people don't like the pairing system, but me personally, I didn't really have any problems with it. Doesn't add anything to the game, doesn't really take anything away. The music. I don't understand how people can dislike the music in this game. It has awesome music. There's good music in the towns, there's great music when you're out on the plains, and some of the boss fights have that kind of music that just, you can't wait to fight another boss right away. The castle. The castle, it's fun to unlock new possibilities by recruiting special characters, the same as it is in the other Suikodens. Like, it's always fun when you finally find the blacksmith, it's fun when you find new hammers. It's just fun when you find those professions where you're like, okay, I don't have to go to this town anymore to get my stuff appraised. I now have an appraiser. Sharpening weapons. Of course, this is standard for the Suikoden games. Sharpening weapons is just as much fun as it always is. Reason number one, the Trinity System. This is the big payoff in Suikoden III. You can tell that a lot of attention to detail went into making this pivotal part of the game function. Rather than merely presenting you with the same story, regardless of who you play as, Suikoden III instead presents a timeline in which each of the three characters experience different events that sometimes happen to overlap. When they do overlap, that's awesome. That's a pleasant experience to see things that maybe another character didn't get to see. However, it's not without its drawbacks. Chapters 4 and 5 in Suikoden III are debatably the weakest. They are offset by the strong plot developments that occur later within the game, but chapters 4 and 5 unfortunately put the player through much of the same story, regardless of who you choose to be the successor to the Flame Champion. Little of the dialogue changes. I think maybe sometimes a him changes to a her, or they'll say Hugo instead of Chris, or instead of Chris they'll say Jeddo. What's more is that chapter 4 begins with odd dialogue that it really clashes with the already established tone of the game. Most affected is Jeddo, who suddenly goes public speaker. It was almost as if someone very uninvolved with the game, like a janitor or something, got to ad-lib these sections. The only ones who don't seem impacted by this oddity are Luke and his comrades. Now, fortunately, by late chapter 4, definitely once chapter 5 is getting going, the game is back to normal. While it might seem odd to have this as my number one point, and be the only point that I criticize, the reason is because after you've played through this game in its entirety, you can't help but sit back and respect the sheer ambition of this game. My criticism is just a want for something that's already good to be even better. Now, it's unfortunately clear that this game is not the masterpiece that it could have been. Now, that's no doubt due to a deadline or money or both, but it's so very close. The first 3 chapters of the game are the best. They're the most ironed out, and they put each of the 3 main characters through their own unique experiences. As I mentioned before, sometimes the plots overlap, like when Chris and Hugo meet during the burning of Korea Village. If you have not yet played as Jeddo when you reach this point, at first it might appear as though he's not there, but when you do play as Jeddo, it is revealed that he is in fact there, but chooses to stay out of the conflict. In fact, it's in his nature to stay out of the limelight and work from behind the scenes. After this event, Boris is accused of having taken the lives of several Korea villagers during the battle. Now, he denies having any involvement, and we believe him because Chris does. Again, if you play as Jeddo, you see that Boris isn't completely honest about this, and he does actually get carried away in this battle. The story goes on to reveal how Boris ultimately feels about this. First, he gets as close to an apology as his character will allow, and then eventually later in the game, he questions if he's even suitable to serve as a knight under Chris. And this is just one instance of time spent wisely on a character. And Boris isn't even one of the main characters. There are many more. Highlights include the unfortunate death of Lulu and Hugo's struggle for revenge throughout the game, Chris's vision within the True Water Rune where she meets her father Wyatt. This is significant because no other character experiences any such thing when they interact with a True Rune. Jeddo's reveal that he is a true rune bearer who is approximately 80 years old. I mean, this video would be an hour long if I tried to list all the moments that I love. But quite possibly the most interesting perspective, in my opinion, is that of Thomas. People are probably thinking, what? You're crazy. Thomas's story is completely optional. Now that's very interesting on Konami's part, considering that this is not DLC, and Thomas is in the story whether you play as him or not. The game plays out the same. But yet they put in this portion of it that you don't have to play. That's interesting. Who does that? Thomas reminds me of a director of sorts. I had mentioned that this game feels like a play. Against his will, Thomas is delegated to the role of master at Budahut Castle, where he inadvertently attracts the ire of the Zexan Council. So ultimately he decides to stand up and fight back against the council with his group of assorted misfits that live there. Thomas has some additional help from behind the scenes, it's Jeddo again, but in the end it's his character that makes people want to fight, that they want him to be the master of the castle. So Thomas has that essential trait that a director needs, and that is you have to bring people together. After Thomas's chapters, he unfortunately falls by the wayside, but he does have some dialogue within the story. He offers to use Budahut as the headquarters for the Fireburner. He even allows the successor to the Flame Champion to use his rune. Much later in the game, he offers to accompany Sasarai when he goes to retrieve his True Earth rune. It's clear that Thomas's role in the game is pivotal. In a way, he serves as that central orchestrating piece of the 108 stars that connects all of the other stars together. But it's done in such a humble and selfless way that Thomas is almost forgotten. His role in reviving Budahut is, in a manner of speaking, more important than any other main character inheriting a True Rune. Again, Thomas's story is entirely optional, and that's a very interesting option indeed. Anyway, I could talk about Suikoden 3 for hours and why you should go and play it, but I wanted to try to keep this video concise. That was my goal. So these were my 5 reasons why I think Suikoden 3 stands amongst the best in the series. I look forward to reading your thoughts. What is your favorite Suikoden and why? As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you next time.